Hi, and welcome to the Core Reports Weekend Edition. So, CTOs, or Chief Technology Officers, across industries have been spending a lot on generative artificial intelligence, specifically in artificial intelligence in general. The hype that we see around artificial intelligence is perhaps visible in some ways from the stock price of Nvidia, which has obviously been shooting through the roof in the last year. Nvidia chips are going in turn into computing in the form of data centers and so on. So there is obviously very strong underlying demand for these chips, which in turn represents perhaps the strides that AI is making. But the question we are asking, and a little more perhaps in the Indian context, is to understand two or three things. One is, how much AI do we really need? And at this point of time, and how much AI have we been able to already use? And if so, where and in what form, in a way that represents serious use of those dollars that CTOs are investing or businesses are investing in their companies to solve real problems. So that's really where I'm coming to what extent are we solving real problems, and will we solve real problems? So let me pick up on a survey that that was released by KPMG, which says that revenue generation has overtaken productivity as the primary gauge businesses use to measure AI's return on investment. So KPMG surveyed about 100 US-based C-suite companies and business leaders, all worth about $1 billion and more. On the other hand, organizations are expected to spend about $39 billion in 2024 on generative AI alone. So this is from International Data Corp, and both data points are from the Wall Street Journal. So CIOs are already talking about AI's efficiency savings, including a boost in productivity for software developers. Amazon, for example, said that it's using AI in a whole bunch of areas, from fraud detection to interpretation of rules and regulations, even validating invoices. So this is the backdrop. So let's dive into it. And let me ask our two guests, Siddharth Pai, founder of Siana Capital, and Nitin Seth, founder and CEO of Incedo. Siddharth Pai is a technology columnist, at least in the context that he's joining us here, though he also runs a venture capital company. Nitin Seth is founder and CEO of Incedo, which is a artificial intelligence manufacturer, for lack of any other term that I can think of, but supplies really AI solutions to companies and is based mostly out of the Valley. So thank you both for joining me. So Sid, why don't I ask you to kick off as someone who's a little on the outside and talk about where are we in the AI evolution today? And more so, like I said, from an India lens.
Sure. So I'll try and cover that on two or three different vectors. The first vector is just the fact that AI is only now coming into its own. The first attempts at having AI are arguably at least 70 years old. Certainly at least 40 years old, when people in Carnegie Mellon University, Cambridge, and Oxford were coming out with computer-based algorithms which were mirroring the mathematical algorithms that could help with predictive AI as we know it. Of course, at the time, while the algorithms existed, the compute power didn't exist, and there wasn't enough data for them to actually operate on to come up with worthwhile predictions. That since has come into its own, and the apex of that is the generative AI that you see. It's just a bunch of algorithms in the back from a mathematical perspective that are trying to predict what the next word should be in a sentence. For instance, if you're using it for text. Similar algorithms work for images, videos, and so on and so forth. Basically, there's some computing going on all the time in the background in order to provide worthwhile text, worthwhile images, worthwhile videos, and so forth. So that's one vector, which is the technical vector. The second vector from an India perspective is when you look at the fact that most of what happens from India is the export of services into the US and to other markets. The US represents about 55% of India's export services market. The UK and other countries make up the rest of it. Lots of what goes out of India, interestingly, from a services perspective, whether it is IT-based or process-based or voice-based, which is the last in the list, typically tends to be work that is repeatable, predictable, and just tedious to do. And in the past, it's been useful to use India as a mezzanine step, or outsourcing or offshoring as a mezzanine step, whether to India or the Philippines, because the cost of automating some of the tedious work was larger than outsourcing it or offshoring it. Now we are coming to a point where the efficiency and the cost of actually getting this work done from an automated standpoint is lower than hiring people in India or the Philippines or elsewhere. So it represents a threat at that level, certainly, for the Indian workforce, especially the younger workforce that's coming in without differentiated skills in either IT or in business or in the specific processes we're talking about. A precursor to this was automation. Things like Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, and others had the ability to take out people who were just sitting at keyboards and striking keys and doing so in a repetitive manner. Now, of course, it's on steroids. So I think on two fronts, one, we've had a technological leap, and two, there is a large population of Indian outsourcing employees whose jobs are at risk.
Got it. Okay, Nitin, you're in the space, and your company is an AI company, so to speak, and you work with a lot of clients, and you're solving real problems for them. So, walk us through how you're seeing this.
See, there is, what Siddharth said, that AI has been in play for quite some time, Govind. So it's not a new thing, but over the last 2 3 years, we have seen some kind of a tipping point, and I think that was really triggered by generative AI, kind of letting the genie out of the box. I think there is both the substance of it and then there is the hype of it. I think the substance of it is that when you look at AI use cases, they have always been around, but largely they have been. It has been very difficult to really make progress on them because of lack of data. Yeah, so data is the core foundation for AI. Now, Gen AI is helping solve that to an extent because Gen AI is not based on a specific data set, it's based on the data of the world. So that is kind of a very big leap, in terms of problem discovery, problem identification. A lot of problems, which have been there. Now, using various Gen AI methods, you can get like a 40 to 60, 40 to 70% initial answer, which to my mind is a huge breakthrough. Yeah, so that's the substance of it, and it's kind of led to a lot of very very substantive relook at use cases. I don't think these are new use cases. I'll come to the use cases, but has led to a relook at the use cases. The second is the hype of it, that with OpenAI, putting ChatGPT in the hands of individuals. There is it has led to that B2C explosion, and that's kind of putting pressure on the enterprises to follow suit. And there is just a very, very, very significant gap between the B2C adoption that we are seeing and on the more internal or B2B front. Yeah, so I think that's the headline. Now, in terms of the actual use cases, you can broadly say they are external and internal, but really kind of into four categories. You have those which are impacting the customer experience and personalization of some sort, which we already see. You go to Amazon and you see personalization, go to Netflix, you see personalization. So that the customer experience use cases have been happening are, this continues to be tremendous amount of work on that. Now then, the second is that how do you translate that into revenue? Yeah, and which is not, through cross sell, upsell, churn management, new products, blah blah blah. I would say the impact on that is still limited. Yeah, the experience is being impacted in a significant way, but the revenue impact is still not that significant. And then the third vector is about efficiency, about automation. Siddharth also talked about automation, and there is a lot happening there. And the promise is so significant, go with that. And at this point, but I see like an epidemic of POCs, or proof of concepts. It's an epidemic of POCs, but the promise, and my company is also doing that. Okay, the promise of the software development life cycle, you can take 20 to 40% off that, not just in seemingly more routine processes like testing and quality assurance, but even in like code reviews, code design. So that whole back office, mid office processes, all the technology processes, there is a tremendous activity happening there. There is also a lot of top-down pressure from boards on this one. Okay, so this is not CTO or CIO driven by any stretch of imagination. It is a top-down danda, if I may put it that way. But the again the realization of that, I think we are still early stages of that. At this point, of the statistics that you shared, at this point, the dollars spent on AI and Gen AI by enterprises is significantly more than the benefit they're getting from it. So we are still at that point in that entire cycle. And the fourth use cases are really around risk and fraud detection, which are there is a lot happening. And I think, at least to my mind, that's the only way you can solve for risk and fraud type of cases. Unfortunately, the in that space, the attackers tend to be even smarter. So they're also using AI. Yeah, so it's kind of like an AI war, that both the attackers and the kind of defenders are using AI. So it's kind of interesting. But look, overall, we I think we will do a great disservice if we see this only as a hype, or hey, this is something which needs to be limited or constrained in some fashion. The level of activity is absolutely tremendous. Maybe there is a question that can that level of activity be more thoughtful, more directed? So that is tremendous, and it is for a reason that the potential is ginormous, but the actual impact realized today is certainly less than the promise.
So, and I'm putting this question to both of you, and let me begin with you, Nitin. So, when boards are saying that, let's do something with AI, or are they just saying that, we've been reading about AI and let's go find something to do with it? Or are they looking inwards and saying, okay, we've been grappling with, let's say, a resource mismatch, and we want to rationalize resources? Or is it something that, okay, our competitors are doing it and therefore we need to do it? So what's the driving motivation, and to solve what problem at this point of time?
Look, the board involvement is certainly what I see, and I mostly work with large enterprises and kind of big sectors like banking, telecom, life sciences. The What I see is that the direction from board is more than just high level. Okay, there is a pressure. Okay, there are questions, targets being talked about. The CI or the CTO is, most cases, most of my clients, has to come and report to the board on a quarterly basis. Yeah, there are at least a couple of really tech savvy people on the boards of most large enterprises that I serve. Okay, so it's a real pressure. Okay, now, whether they've gone to the extent of saying that, oh, here is a specific use that as a board we are sponsoring, not really,
Got
not
it.
really.
And how are you seeing it, Sid, from again, maybe a little removed from the arena?
Yeah, I got out of the arena on
And
purpose.
let
Is
me
what
also add, if I can supplement that question, I mean, you've seen several technology waves, and you've also advised clients on this in the past. And of course, this
yes.
is seemingly a bigger wave than many others. But again, if you were to contrast.
So I agree with Nitin. I actually liked his prior characterization of the four little windows. It's always worthwhile to have for a consultant to have a two by two. It helps put things in perspective. The I think the push from boards, as he points out, is large. I still advise largely friends more than anybody else, and just got back from a trip just late last night, where the entire discussion at a board level was around what Nitin was talking about. And with tech savvy people on the board, in at least in my experience, I've seen there are specific use cases they talk about. For instance, they know that there are special areas in that particular company which have been areas of concern in the past, especially on the cost side or the efficiency side or the technology side. And they hit on those quite hard. Um, the use cases for revenue building are still sort of up in the air. AI has always promised it. I mean, when I worked for the Carnegie Group in the US 30 some odd years ago, which is an offshoot of Carnegie Mellon University, the main problem we were trying to solve was that of upsell and cross sell and so on and so forth by coming up with product recommendations. While AI used to try and solve that and is still trying to solve it, I don't quite, as Nitin said, I don't quite see solid use cases around that just yet. The cost takeout use cases and the efficiency use cases are a lot more solid. So I agree with what Nitin said. I think at the CIO level and the CTO level, what they're getting, and the CEO level, to be honest, is the push that they're getting from their boards is be ahead of this technology, please, because it's a fundamental change in the way that we will be conducting business. The waves in the past was smaller, and you could afford to be a little late to the party because you could just have momentum take you forward. Like Accenture built up in India much, a little bit after, but they built up quickly. Um, but not this one. You can't afford to be late to the party. So I think that's why boards are scrutinizing it as much as they are. So yeah, I agree with
Right.
everything that Nitin just said.
Okay, so let's look at some of the flip sides of AI as we know it. So we know that there is a data bias problem. The initial push was to use all the data out there in the world, and then said, no, that's dangerous. Let's focus on the data within organizations, and I think that transition is happening. But even within that, there is the possibility of data bias. There's, of course, the famous term hallucination, where AI is not interpreting properly. How are you seeing that, Nitin? I mean, in terms of the use cases that you're working on, and how are you solving for that?
It's a massive issue, Govind, and it's a massive area of activity. And frankly, that's where when you say AI spend, majority of that spend is going on two areas. One is Nvidia on the compute infrastructure, and the second is on the data infrastructure. Okay, and that's where, for example, companies like me are building their future. Yeah, so there are four type of data problems. The first problem is, you kind of talked about it, which is, but I'll put it differently. It's about contextualizing the data. And I would submit that it's not about either or, Govind. It's not saying that, oh, it's all Gen AI and the data of the world, or it's enterprise data within. You need both. Let's be clear about it. Yeah. So you need both. But then, how do you kind of, what do you need? Yeah. Of that, what do you need? What do you use for? Yeah. The second is the data. Once you are bringing different data together, outside, inside, multiple internal sources, the second problem is the data integration problem. How do you bring it together? Because these are very fundamentally very different. These are not even apples to oranges. This is like completely different planets. Yeah. So how do you bring that, how do you integrate that data? You can't do it physically. How do you do it logically? Then the third question, once you kind of progress on data integration, is the data quality question. That garbage in, garbage out, we always know that. Now the challenge that is happening, Govind and Siddharth, is that it's not just about the traditional measures of data quality, about accuracy and timeliness and blah blah blah. It is also about context. Yeah, in a particular context, a particular type of data may be okay, in other contexts it is different. So the data quality question is becoming more complex. And the fourth is about data security, which is at this point, and especially if you're in a regulated industry like like financial services, it is, or healthcare, they have a slightly different concern, which is about personal data. Data security is a huge issue. And how does your data flow work? Because the nature of AI is that's a bidirectional flow. That you're getting the learning benefit, but what are you contributing back to it? How do you protect that? So those are the four issues, when you break down the high level of the bias kind of type of a question, which makes all the headlines, and enterprises are aware of it. Yeah, this is how it breaks down, that what data you bring together and contextualize it, how you integrate it, how you solve for data quality, and the fourth is data security.
And you wrote this book called Mastering the Data Paradox, which I guess is sort of a prelude to the AI, some of the questions in the context of AI. So are these two linked? And good data, mastering the data paradox, leads to better and more efficient application of AI?
Absolutely. I see data and AI as completely linked. They're conjoined. They are both a cause and effect of each other. You can't, I think it's kind of futile trying to disaggregate them, because AI is the foundation of that is data. But then also AI you use to solve for some of the bigger data issues. So for example, the four issues I talked about, the data quality issue and the data security issue, actually the way to solve it is also AI. So it's kind of like a Janus, it's like a kind of a double, two-faced kind of a thing. And the mastering the data paradox is simply saying that on one hand, we are having a data deluge, yeah, which is very difficult to deal with. On the other hand, there is a insights drought, yeah, there isn't enough to actually use, which is kind of the main theme of, I think, where you are coming from, Govind, right? That, on the broader AI question. So that's the data paradox, the drought, the delusion drought, kind of like water everywhere, yet not a drop to drink. And data is absolutely the the unsolved problem. The compute is there are three things that go into AI: compute, algorithms, and data. The compute is there, it's just very expensive. It's very expensive. So that has to be worked on. And that's a very big challenge for us in India. Yeah. Algorithms are largely there. Okay. There's a lot of progress that has happened. Of the three, the big kind of place, where we are stumbling is data, because while the data volume and everything is there, but being able to sift out and say, okay, what is useful, but what is actually junk, but still is, kind of, getting a lot of, capacity and kind of cost, and we cut that out. I think those are type of problems that we are still struggling a lot with.
Got it. So, Sid, can I come to you on the sort of data policy question now? We are using AI, we've adopted it. Governments are also looking at AI closely, whether it's the government of India, the European Union, the United States. Everyone will have regulations of some sort. It may or may not impact enterprises and what they're doing inside those enterprises, but it will definitely affect the way we use AI, at least as consumers, or our data gets taken, and which in turn may go back and affect AI, but affect enterprises. In your sense today, what are the key issues that we're looking at when it comes to, let's say, the way AI policy is being framed and should be framed in order to make sure that AI is more equitable in its applications?
So I'll tell you what's been happening so far is certainly that with respect to data, what Nitin brought up earlier, which is personal data being safeguarded, has been mainly the vector on which governments are regulating. There is an additional thing that is coming up, which is very interesting, probably also sinister, which is that there is a lot more, and I have no. I understand why governments are doing this, but there's a need to hold on to data in pools and in locations where they can get to it. So the idea that my data may be going to China or it may be going to some other country is something that I would expect that my government would look into. And more than that, the government is also interested to make sure that its own data is not going to hostile nations. Cybersecurity is huge, by the way, which is also, we touched on it earlier as we were talking about stuff, and the ability to get to data which you shouldn't be able to get to with bad guys or the bad actors, which can be bad state actors, by the way, as well. Is so much easier in this world because we're computing all over the place. Just look at today's outage, for instance, with Azure being out. There are flights even in India, people are having difficulty getting onto flights, something that started in the US. Media houses, I just wrote an article, just finished up one for next week for Mint. They were having trouble. They were not the only ones, others did. Anybody with a Microsoft-based system has been having trouble today, which doesn't bode well for Microsoft, and their data is all over the place. And my classmate Thomas Kurian, who runs Google Cloud, my old school classmate, is just recently in the news for trying to for 26 billion to make Google's largest ever acquisition of a company called V in the US, again for cybersecurity. This is to make sure that data is safeguarded. The problem is that we will end up in a situation where we have these national islands of data as a result of this regulation, which then doesn't allow us necessarily to get the most out of data from an AI perspective. But unfortunately, I see in the short term that that's what's going to happen. The regulations around keeping data local and keeping data within a country is going to become much more important, thereby blunting some of the efficacy. And the second thing is, I think we will see a lot of bad state actors as well. I mean, I've written in the past about how, if you own a phone, please be careful. Make sure that, or if you've security cameras up in your home, find out who the maker is. I mean, if it's a Chinese maker, it's likely somebody in China knows what you look like. I don't mean to cast aspersions on any particular country here, but this nationalization and local keeping national islands of data is going to come in the way. Uh, there's one more last aspect that I wanted to switch on data, which Nitin sort of covered, but it's got nothing to do with policy. It's got to do with the nature of the data and why NVIDIA is doing well. Is that if you look at the data that's required for AI operations, especially for things like generative AI, where you're not working just on two variables, you're not working on an X and Y, you're working on a third variable, a Z or a B or C or whatever it is. You end up with a situation where your data is not in tables, they're not in line, rows and columns. You also have another vector, which is the depth. And therefore, the reason why NVIDIA is doing as well as it's doing is with GUI chips, they have the ability to deal with data in 3 dimensions rather than just 2 dimensions. And that is another thing that increases the complexity of the kind of data that we're dealing with from an AI perspective. So I think, at some point, hopefully we have chip manufacturers or at least chip designers who can get to the same level that NVIDIA is at, and give them a little bit of competition right now, because the monopoly they have at this point is frightening. The rents are huge. You have to wait 2 years or more to get computing capacity, and if you're in India, it's probably longer, as Nitin pointed out. And hopefully that there should be some policy work there to break that monopoly soon, I hope.
Right.
But I'll leave it to that.
Yeah, right. Thanks for that. We're running out of time. So let me get a last question into Nitin. So two things. One is, how are you seeing AI policy evolve? And when I say, or rather policy governing AI. Second is, if you would say from what you've seen in, let's say, the last couple of years and the kind of investments that have gone in, what would you tell companies, boards, CTOs, and so on today? I mean, where do you maybe step up on the gas, and maybe where do you pull back a little bit, not just in terms of investments, but the next layer?
So, first part, the AI policy, I don't really see it as different from the data policy. I think this is a very joined up debate. I'm very concerned about it, Govind. I'm very concerned about it because of two reasons. First is that this is something which really, really needs global standards. It really needs global standards. It's kind of like, global emission standards. You can have some country specific things, but you need a basic standard, because this is not a local play at all. This is, data privacy. These are not choices that you can get individual consumers to be making. It's too complex for them. You need to have a basic standard, and today there is almost no service which is purely local. Yeah. So there is a need for global standards that is not happening enough and not at the right level. The second issue is that, because these issues, you know data privacy and data security, these are the big issues. See, bias is going to get addressed, Govind. Okay. But data privacy, which is at an individual level, data security, which is at an enterprise level, these are mega issues. They can, if there is something which can bring down the AI revolution, it is these two. Okay, it is these two, and and it and like this whole Microsoft outage, it kind of brings reactionary things, right? And it kind of really brings that governance. And what I also see is that, especially with the banks that I serve, that they have not made a lot of progress compared to some other sectors and compared to the data they have. And I think it's because that governance is stifling innovation. Yeah. So there is this trade-off. Security and privacy are extremely paramount. You need to handle it in a very mature fashion to kind of release the power of AI. But if you're not handling it well, it can actually block this entire thing, and bring this again, the heavy hand of governance, both internal and external. Yeah. And I think that's a very big challenge. And today, the level of seniority, the level of maturity that is needed in the debate is not there. Yeah, because whenever I am in data policy conversations, they're all with a very restrictive perspective. Yeah. They are not talking as much about use cases. They're not as much talking as much about growth. and what to enable. No, there is no conversation about that. And but look, both of these conversations need to go together. um, Now, on your second question, that what do I tell companies? Look, uh, AI, is a bandwagon you can't get off. Okay, you have to do it. Okay, so all this thing about how much is enough and should you do it, don't get caught into existential debates. You have to do it. You have to do it, but you have to do it smartly. Yeah, just don't go with the hype. You have to be. I think one of the first questions that you ask, that you have to be specific about the problems you're looking to solve. Those problems, end of the day, come from largely your customer problems. That, hey, most of the clients I serve have a massive organic growth problem. Yeah, that, what is stopping that? How can you unlock growth on your delivery side? It's not just a blind. There is a little bit of a blind cost cutting kind of a mindset that is happening. Yeah, that what are the problems? Yeah, so be specific. Be specific. If you are specific, I think it will allow you to direct your AI efforts a lot more intelligently, in a more focused fashion, because the two places you're really spending money is on your compute capacity and is on your data. That's really where you're spending money. And focus, actually narrowing down in a paradoxical way, when you're in this big data world, narrowing it down is actually the way, I think, to really get benefit from AI, and I think is key to unlocking. Otherwise, I think it is just going to lead to a bit of a gridlock.
We've run out
Yeah,
of time.
Govind,
Thank you so
I
much.
agree.
Yeah, you wanted to add something quickly, Sid?
No, Govind, I was just about to say that I agree with what Nitin said. I think focus is really important at this point, rather than trying to fix the morass. Focus on what can be done, and move forward on that. So,
Great.
but
Wonderful.
thank you.
Wonderful talking
You-
to both of you. Thank you so much for joining me. And I do hope to come back to this conversation as the industry evolves and as more and more companies look to find solutions for their real problems. And I'm sure we'll have more to talk about as well. Thank you so much.